Our final panel of the day, saving the best for last. Two of my favorite guys. David, you didn't hear it, but when I was wrapping up the last panel, I mentioned how serious you are, but you always find a way to make it fun. And that's why you're here interviewing one of our biggest heroes in the state legislature. So take it away, David. Let me unmute you.
I do work better without the mute on. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Susan. Thanks for putting on this series of very important and very vital discussions, not just for the cannabis industry, but for the cannabis community. I'm going to get right into our interview. I just want to say I'm David Bienenstock. I'm a journalist. I've been covering cannabis since 2002. I'm the host of a podcast called Great Moments in Weed History, and I am excited to speak with our representative here today, who was elected to the State Assembly's 18th District in 2012. He represents the cities of Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro. He is Rob, is it Bonta? I'm saying it right?
Yeah, Bonta.
Bonta.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. Thank you so much for everything you've done and are doing for the cannabis community and industry. And I thought that maybe you could start by giving us a little bit of your journey to this point, to how this became an important issue for you and how you became such an important advocate for cannabis.
Totally. Thank you, David, for the question. Thank you, Susan, for putting on another important panel and discussion. Thanks to all of our participants who are tuned in, and appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Again, Rob Bonta, California State Assembly member, represent Oakland, Alameda, San Leandro, in my 8th year in the state legislature. And really, this is a year like no other, with full of unique challenges and journeys, and definitely with an impact on the cannabis industry and potential cannabis solutions, whether it be in the budget or the legislature. So happy to talk about that. But you know, I represent Oakland, and Oakland has been a leader, a pioneer, with respect to cannabis. Places like Harborside and Oaksterdam are here and started here. Some of the early pioneering work has happened here in Oakland, and the city of Oakland was one of the first to open up to the cannabis industry and provide a regulatory framework. In 2015, I was asked by a number of groups to help accomplish something that hadn't been done before, although it had been tried and it had been attempted, and that is work to provide a set of statewide regulations on medical cannabis. And we had seen a sort of separation, a divide, a tension between two groups on either side, with sort of labor and industry on one side and law enforcement and cities on the other, each with different perspectives on how to move forward in that space. And after multiple efforts, no solution being forthcoming. And so I was asked to be involved. I wanted to be involved, in part because of the historical pioneering work in Oakland, as well as the work I was doing on the health committee. I've been on the health committee. I've been the Assembly Health Chair, and the perspective of the patient, the medical cannabis patient, had always been very compelling to me, and something I wanted to assist with and support with. So in 2015, we came together as a number of different legislators from actually both sides of the aisle, and we had a number of groups, one who were very close to law enforcement and the cities, and then another set that was more, had closer connections to labor and the industry. And we decided that we were going to work together and sort of push our respective groups to find common ground. And literally over thousands of hours of hashing it out at the conference table, got to the MCRSA that year in 2015. And looking back to that point, there was all sorts of stigma, all sorts of misunderstanding, a lot of lack of interest in understanding among legislators, just, instinctive, rapid conclusions about what cannabis is without really knowing the full story. But by having it be bipartisan, by having all the parts of the coalition come together, we were able to get something done which hadn't been done before, which is provide a regulatory framework for cannabis that involved environmental protections and patient protections, public safety components, and a sensible, thoughtful regulatory framework. We certainly did our best to get it as right as possible, but you always try and you probably always fail. Perfection is an aspiration, not something that you can accomplish. And so there were definitely components of the MCRSA which weren't, in the end, weren't not as had unintended consequences or didn't work the way we hoped. Our work, though, became the basis and the foundation of Prop 64, and Prop 64 did take some notable changes and departures away from that work. But a lot of the foundations were there. And so, and Prop 64, of course, passed, so legalizing adult use cannabis in the state of California the following year. So in 1 year, from November 2015 to November 2016, we just had a lot of change in the cannabis space. And when you move that fast, that quickly, there's always things that you don't get right. And so my work since then has been kind of an ongoing effort to get closer to perfection, to be honest about things that aren't working, to see the challenges in the cannabis ecosystem, to try to fix them, to try to make them better, to help the cannabis industry be successful in a regulated marketplace as the people of California wished, to provide opportunities for working people to succeed. I think that the business industry and labor are inextricably intertwined, and their futures are connected to one another, and their ability to succeed is connected to one another. So I certainly encourage our industry, whenever possible, to embrace working people and organized labor. I also, just realize that this economic moment is incredibly difficult. I think we did see just before or just as we were going into shelter in place some spikes in demand, but it looks like in retrospect that was in part due to the uncertainty around whether cannabis would be deemed essential, and looks like to be some consumer stockpiling and patient stockpiling before the possibility of closure. But thankfully, at least at the state level, the cannabis industry has been deemed essential. Maybe at least one county hasn't seen it the same way. But despite that, even being deemed essential, which I think is huge symbolically and in reality, just in terms of the stigma that the cannabis industry had in the past, to have the state of California deem it an essential industry is, I think, very powerful. But I know that you all are struggling. You were struggling before. The cannabis industry was struggling before COVID-19, and everyone's struggling a lot more since. And so certainly there's a desire on my part to assist and to try to be as supportive as possible. With regard, well, let me stop there for a second, because you asked about the journey and I started talking about 10 million other things. So let me pause for a moment, David, and just say thank you for the question, and happy to answer another one if you have one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really important for everybody to understand how you got here. I think we all have our own version of how we got here, if we're stakeholders in the industry, or if you're a patient, or if you've just been a part of this as a political movement. I think one thing that you touched on, the symbolic power of being declared an essential industry, when you really dial into what that word essential means. And that's something that, like, I heard from people all over the country, and somewhat, there's a little bit of a wink, wink, haha to it, but underlying it is the very real fact that people do need access to cannabis, and that the state of California and other states, not every state, unfortunately, has stepped up to recognize that fact. And that's powerful, as you say, on the ground, how it affects people, their families, their communities, patients, consumers, workers in the industry, but also how it affects us moving out of this. So were you a part, how did that come to be? How did it come to be declared essential? How close of a call was that? Because we'd obviously be in a very different paradigm right now if that declaration had not been made. And maybe from there, give us an idea of what you think the state of California is doing well right now in terms of cannabis regulation in this particular moment, and what you are fighting to improve. What more could be done right now that you're advocating?
Great, thanks, David. I wasn't directly a part of that decision. That came from the governor's administration, and we know that the governor is, was a champion of Prop 64, and is someone who's been open-minded and thoughtful and generally supportive of the cannabis industry. He has some folks that lead his cannabis work who are supportive of the industry, generally want to make it work. Understand what Prop 64 means when the people of the state have spoken up and said they wanted a regulated cannabis industry on adult use side, and what it meant. Decades ago, when we did the same thing for medical cannabis with Nicole Elliott providing just exemplary leadership in this space. So it came from the governor's administration, and I'm thankful that they made that decision. I like to think that maybe indirectly I've had some influence with my partners and my colleagues with the work that we did with MCRSA, raising the profile of a legalized and regulated medical cannabis industry, and then also the support I had for Prop 64. That all really changed the environment. It was sort of this continuum of the stigma starting to fall away more and more, and people seeing it as something that was, seeing the patient perspective, seeing some of the important consumer perspective, seeing the need and the essential nature of it. So I feel like I've been part of that effort through my work, but it was not a direct decision by my part. It was Nicole Elliott and Governor Newsom, and I appreciate their leadership in that regard. What have we been doing now? I've been working for a number of years on an effort to lower the taxes for the excise tax by 4% and removing the cultivation tax entirely for 3 years to really help with this migration and the movement of the cannabis industry and California businesses from a unregulated illegal marketplace to a regulated legal marketplace, and that's hard to do. It requires removal of barriers and obstacles, and as well as incentives. And I thought that in the early days, we needed to really lower that tax burden, and just temporarily to allow for that migration to the legalized marketplace and the regulated marketplace. And I've had a hard time convincing enough of my colleagues that that's the right move. I think there's been concerns about the amount of revenue that would be generated if we did that. Some people think if you tax at a lower rate, you generate less tax revenue. There's certainly some sense to that. I actually think the opposite. I think if you lower the tax rate, then more people start participating as taxpayers, and you grow the tax base, you have more taxpayers, and you generate more revenue as a result. So I think you can get both, meaning more people in the regulated marketplace, more cannabis businesses in the regulated marketplace, and more revenue. But I don't have a crystal ball, and I can't guarantee that, and there's different perspectives on that issue. That bill actually is not moving forward this year, unfortunately. I continue to believe it's the right move, but it's a heavy lift in a international pandemic scenario with us being projected to be $53 billion in deficit, as some of the projections showed today. So a lot of folks are just really reluctant to do anything that could lower revenues when we already have decreasing tax revenues on the sales tax side, on the income tax side. So I think that the approach that the governor's administration, again, led by Nicole Elliott, so ably and skillfully with respect to removing barriers is an appropriate one, making it easier in terms of permits or licenses to be able to operate, trying to, the 90 days of forbearance or delay in tax collection, every bit helps. And I think that that's probably going to be the best way to proceed right now. I think there is probably, though, some uncertainty around legislators who aren't following this super closely about whether the cannabis industry is hurting or not, and the degree to which they're hurting. I think some folks did hear about that pop, that blip, that spike. That was a moment in time when folks were stockpiling and worried about the future, not sure if they're going to have access to cannabis, so saving it up. But the story since then maybe is not as well known. And I think coalitions are always work, they're always persuasive, they're always stronger. And the more folks who can be part of a narrative, sign on to a letter, make the case that the industry is struggling and provide some opportunities that make sense in a situation where we're in a recession, where our budget is shrinking, but that could still be of assistance, and laying those out. I think that would be a helpful way to move forward.
Excellent. And in terms of things that challenges that are specific to the cannabis industry, right now I could think of two. One is, as many industries struggle right now, and as we move forward in a somewhat uncertain future, but what's unique to the cannabis industry is, on the one hand, most industries, from alcohol to the grocery store, are not competing with an existing underground market. And that predates this situation now, but I would imagine this is exasperating it. And certainly we don't want people, right now, if you are doing curbside pickup at a licensed dispensary that is following the state guidelines, you are as reasonably safe making that purchase as can be. If you are making that same purchase in the underground market, there's just simply no regulation or oversight. And that's not to say people on an individual basis wouldn't act with some good sense, but we don't want that as a state. We don't want that as a community. And on the other side of that, the other challenge that's unique to this industry is that access to banking, access to federal relief, access to any of the kinds of safety nets financially that other industries are able to access. So I'm wondering if you can talk about those two challenges specifically, and what you see the state doing now, and what the state might do better in the future to help make up for those challenges, or to help I think everyone, from the regulators to the businesses to the consumers and patients, want this to succeed. So how do we mutually support that?
Yeah, thank you, David, for that observation around some of the unique aspects of the cannabis industry, and I couldn't agree more. The whole idea of there being a gray market that is always there to challenge the regulated marketplace, to potentially undercut it, that may not be paying their taxes or meeting the regulatory requirements, and offering product at a price point that's below what the regular marketplace can, and undercutting them. That's unique, that's different. And that's been a lot of my argument to my colleagues about why Democrats should support a tax reduction, for businesses, something that's not particularly commonplace among Democrats. And I've had numbers of conversations where I've talked to my colleagues, and they say, I just have an instinctive resistance to a corporate tax cut, and it takes a lot of words and a good amount of time and explanation to describe why this isn't that, why you shouldn't think that, why this is different, why, and combined with the people of the state's desire to have this regulated marketplace. That's what they wanted, that's what they voted for, that's what they asked for. And as leaders, we should help get that, provide that for our people. So there are barriers there. It is hard to succeed in the regulated marketplace, especially when you have a lot of regulation, high taxes. You have taxes at the state level, at the federal level. You can't bank, and you have a gray marketplace that's always undercutting you. And when we talk about stigma and stereotypes and misconceptions, there's also misconception that the cannabis industry is just flush all the time, throwing off money, that it's money growing on trees, and the flow doesn't stop. The realization that it's low margin, There's a lot of capital investment propping up the industry, and there's not a lot of businesses that are operationally profitable yet. Folks don't understand all that, so it takes some time to divorce folks from their pre-existing instinctive views on this issue of what lowering taxes means. So that is a very important part of the story, David, and one I often tell and need to tell to explain the unique circumstances and challenges that the cannabis industry is facing. Banking is one too, and we've tried in so many different ways at the state level to help crack that nut and provide a solution, and it's been difficult. I think there's growing, just as there was kind of this continuum of stigma falling away at the state level. I hope and believe that some of the same occurs at the federal level. I think framing the banking issue as not a cannabis issue, but as a straight up public safety issue is also helpful. It's just not safe and it's not right. And so some folks might never divorce themselves from the stigma they have around cannabis in certain states, certain senators or certain Congress people. But I think everyone can understand what it means to be carrying around bags of cash and the public safety risk that comes with that, and the need to just make people safer. I think that's another way of framing it and talking about it. A Democratic administration could really make a difference. And, we've heard some commitments regarding policy from the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden. And, if he took the White House instead of our current occupant, then it could be a lot different. So, elections matter, and the platform of our federal leaders matters. Of course, the president, the leader of the free world, I think that would matter a lot too. But, I think it is difficult for the state to help provide a complete solution on an issue where there's, federal regulation of the banking industry. It really is it's a federal animal in terms of its regulation and its oversight. So it's difficult. But there are some businesses or some banks that, dipping their toe in the water. East West Bank beginning to do some banking with the cannabis industry, though that's a good sign. And again, that growing appetite to be supportive and to provide solutions as the stigma falls away is helpful as well. But I've always thought that the true solution, the complete solution on the banking issue was going to be at the federal level. And I've seen that some progress has been made, though we're not there.
Absolutely. And to continue with us not being there, this is, this has been an issue every day for people in the cannabis industry since there has been at least a state legal cannabis industry anywhere in this country. So again, it's not a new issue, but now in dealing with this current crisis, health crisis and an economic crisis, if you try to apply for any number of these federal relief programs, it is specifically in the application, you are not eligible. I'm not going to I don't have the language to quote, but that says, in essence, if you're in the cannabis industry, you're not eligible for this federal relief. And I'm wondering if there is a recognition, I'm assuming, and I hear that there is one on your part, but if there's a recognition within the state government of California at the highest levels, at the BCC, in the governor's office, that money that any other business would have access to right now is not there, that it's discriminatory, certainly from the perspective of a Californian. And is there any recognition at the state level, at the BCC, in the governor's office, that money should be made up? That the state of California bears a responsibility to provide that same economic relief to cannabis businesses acting in the public interest right now?
How widespread that view is, I don't know. It is a pretty nuanced view for, sort of insiders who understand all the different layerings and components of, the federal treatment of the cannabis industry versus state treatment, what that means for stimulus packages and access to banking and loans that work with FDIC insured banks and federally regulated banks. Although I will say this, the general perspective, I think, of California, without speaking for every individual leader, is that in a crisis, when you have stimulus packages, the big guns, the big money comes from the federal government. They can deficit spend, they can print money, they send a lot of money out, and we're happy to be recipients of that support. We should be lobbying for as much as we can as the largest state in the nation, the 5th largest economy in the world, as the generator of so much tax revenue that goes to the federal government. And then to the extent certain parts of our state, certain parts of our diverse state who are part of our California for All mentality and our inclusive vision are left out, then we should take steps to fill those gaps. That happens regularly with our undocumented immigrant community, and who are not eligible for the federal services for the most part, federal stimulus packages included. And so we did just what you described, David. We stepped in, and with the governor and his team's leadership, they set up a fund, $125 million, 75 million, I believe, from the state, 50 million that they raised from philanthropy to help provide similar supports to undocumented Californians who need support as well, and who are not getting those $1,200 checks or that $500 each for each child. That's appropriate. That's the right thing to do. We should do that. The same is true for, conceptually for the cannabis industry, as you said, left out of federal stimulus packages, prohibited from receipt of those funds. Schedule I drug in the mind of the federal government. And so it is something I think we should be focusing on. It's something I'm thinking about. I know there's also a lot of creative and productive thinking being done in the governor's office on this issue, again, by Nicole Elliott leading that charge. And it might not look exactly the same because some of these loans and they're just not available to the cannabis industry because of their federal nexus. But the $50,000 interest-free loan that is, in my view, very creatively structured with respect to not paying your sales and use tax and keeping it as a loan for a year without penalty and without interest, that's available to the cannabis industry. Doesn't solve every problem, not the panacea, but that was, I thought, a very creative support provided by the governor's administration, and we need to continue to think of other creative ways with the knowledge that, as you said, the cannabis industry, these are businesses, these are California businesses like any other California business, and if they're left out of federal support, they are deserving of consideration of support from the state.
Great. I know we have a lot of cannabis industry owners and operators listening right now. So just to sort of be clear, the relief that you just said is available. What is that specifically, and how can people investigate it?
Let me try to get a website that I believe exists specifically for cannabis industry relief. I don't know that I've seen it before. CDTFA's website has good content, I believe is where it's housed. But it's not, the product that I was talking about specifically is regarding sales and use tax. It's for small businesses, and it's an interest-free loan up to $50,000. The governor announced it a couple weeks ago in one of his very informative and transparent press conferences. And basically, you don't pay your sales and use tax to the government, to Sacramento. You keep it, you hold it for up to a year. You can use it as cash flow for your business, and then you pay it back a year later than it was due, and you pay it with no interest. So it's essentially an interest-free loan of $50,000 for a year.
Great, thank you. That brings up another issue that I think Susan said at the top I was going to make this hilarious, but it's a difficult time right now, and I want to get into these serious issues with you while we have you. So I apologize for that. But I think another aspect of this is, if we think of this event around this virus as a storm, it would appear to me that whoever has the most capital going into this time and can weather the longest, harshest storm is going to come out of this, on the other side, not just having survived, but potentially in a position to gobble up market share, take over other companies, buy out basically distressed assets in the cannabis industry who were not as well capitalized, possibly just because they were a smaller mom and pop business. They didn't raise tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to get into this space. And so I think we're obviously still in the middle of this, but looking forward to that time. How do we prevent that from happening? Is that even conceived of among your colleagues as an important goal to prevent the kind of sort of hyper consolidation that would come from having one class of cannabis businesses who are still very well capitalized and another who are going to come out of this struggling and distressed? What, if anything, can we do to prevent them from simply buying everyone up? And we see a very, very top-heavy industry controlled and operated by very large and well-capitalized players.
I think that is something that would be of interest to the legislature, and I don't want to speak for the governor's administration, but we don't want to see predatory activity during a crisis. It's distasteful, it's inappropriate. We shouldn't be seeing folks who are taking advantage of the struggles of others during an international pandemic. We're all facing it together. It's a common threat. We should be essentially doing a stand down where we try to support one another, knowing that the most vulnerable that are teetering on the edge are going to be the first to suffer and the worst to suffer, and that they need help, they need support, they need cash in their pockets immediately if they've lost their job and can't go to work. And they shouldn't be losing their house, they shouldn't be losing their apartment, they shouldn't be put out on the street. We need to provide relief to people. Same with small businesses. We need a sort of a Main Street support instead of Wall Street. We shouldn't be allowing for consolidation during this time to the extent we can control it and prohibit it. No one should come out of this crisis, using it in a predatory way to take advantage of someone else's pain and anguish and struggle. So I think there's a lot of value-based interest in an approach to provide protections where we can, obviously consistent with state law and our abilities to do so. But that concept, I think, would have a lot of traction in terms of just what's fair and what's right, and having an industry that has small businesses and mom and pops and a diversity of players and multiple competitors providing different innovations and products and services, and not just a consolidation by mega corporations.
Thank you. And kind of on that point, I'm sure there's quite a lot of lobbying going on right now from every industry, from every interest group. How do you assess the job that the cannabis industry broadly is doing in terms of lobbying around these issues? And within that, what voices do you want to hear more? Or how can people, particularly right now at home, who should we be contacting, and what messages do you think really need to be heard right now?
I think a couple of things in response to that question. One, that coalitions are always more powerful. So if it's the industry working with labor, working with social justice groups, working with patient advocate groups, all speaking with one voice, that's the best. And all saying, here are the challenges that we're all collectively facing. We share our conviction that these challenges are the ones that need to be addressed first, and that these are some proposals that we have. That's the best. As I've always believed and said, and I'll say it again here, I really do think that the industry's future is inextricably interlinked with working people and labor. And when organized labor works with the industry to make asks for support in times of struggle, that can be a very powerful voice, a much more amplified voice. So I recommend working in coalitions. I mean, for folks that don't have, organized labor, UFCW, or the Teamsters as their workers right now, and are staring in the face an increase in cost, I know that can be hard. I understand that, especially now in a crisis. It was hard before, it's even harder now. But I think there's a lot of broad benefits in terms of the ability to advocate effectively and find comprehensive solutions that come with a partnership with labor that I just can't recommend enough. But that coalition approach, very important. Getting all the different voices in support of a singular pathway for success and for support and for emergence of the industry is going to be the best way to do it. If you, and I know that there's different segments of the industry. I know that some industry associations don't get along with others. But I just really want to highly recommend that folks think about potential solutions that help everybody, and kind of put aside differences for now, and try to find ways to address this common threat of a pandemic created recession.
We did that, Rob, earlier today. We did that. We are united. We had a organizing the orgs.
Great news.
Yay! We had an organizing the orgs panel, and it went, I swear, it seemed like it was 5 minutes long. It went by so fast. We're gonna take it up again next month, but they're vowing to work together. And we can't bombard you with, I talked to a leader from an organization yesterday, and he wanted me to push this bill, and I'm like, no. We're wasting their time. You're wasting your time. That's not on anybody's radar right now.
Right.
Join us on this panel. We've got to get organized, and that's going to happen.
I love it. I'm very happy to hear that. Thanks, Susan, for that update. I think if the more everyone is working from the same playbook, has the same priorities, believes that the same pathway forward is the pathway for success, the better.
And sort of picking up on that lobbying idea and working together, when we compare the cannabis lobby such as it exists to something like the alcohol lobby here in California, which is just on a measure of scale, larger, more politically influential, more flush with money, and in many ways, despite how we might personally feel about the difference between cannabis and alcohol, ironically, alcohol doesn't always face the same stigmas that cannabis does. And so how do you compare, forget about the federal response right now, but how do you compare what the state of California is doing for the alcohol industry to the cannabis industry? And are there things that are benefiting the alcohol industry right now that are being denied to cannabis, and how do we gain parity with them?
On the lobbying side, I think you have some of the most talented, knowledgeable, effective lobbyists working for the industry. It's kind of, I guess, viewed as an emerging industry that has a lot of growth opportunity and is in its nascent stages, has a lot of early hurdles to overcome and work through before there can be stability. The alcohol industry has been around a lot longer. There's a set of rules in place that generally work for them. There were some tweaks that were made during the COVID-19 pandemic that provided some assistance with respect to ABC not enforcing certain things, like allowing for takeout alcohol with takeout meals when they were being picked up. I think that was sound. That was thoughtful. I believe there was also some enforcement around hours of operation, which could make sense, but you don't want to have lack of parity. There should be parity in the rules with cannabis. If there's a certain set of hours, allowance of operation for the alcohol industry, but it's not being provided to the cannabis industry, there should be a real compelling reason why. So, but I don't think it's because of different lobbying power or success. The alcohol industry has very talented advocates and government relations folks and lobbyists as well. But I think the cannabis industry, doesn't is second to none in terms of the folks working. There's a lot of different folks working on it. One of my favorites is Max Michalonis He was in my office before. I think he's incredibly knowledgeable and just very talented. Knows as much about this issue as anybody. I've learned from him over many years and continue to. And there's many others. So I don't know that it's a lobbying issue. I think it's an understanding issue. The legislature doesn't fully understand it. There's a few champions who've dug deep and really been passionate about this space and wanting to work through the challenges. Others, it's a lower priority, so it's hard to provide enough bandwidth to it, to provide sometimes enough attention to appreciate every one of the different nuances that exists. So that's my perspective. I think there's very talented lobbyists. I just think the issues are different. With that, continuing that existing gray marketplace, the challenges of the cost of doing business with taxes and regulation, and some people say, why should we change Prop 64? The people voted already. We shouldn't be lowering the taxes. So there's a lot of different components that make it different than alcohol.
Sure. I want to get to kind of a forward-thinking issue, but we've seen this alliance of Western states that California is a part of, specific to dealing with the virus. We've seen a similar alliance of states in the Northeast, and actually Governor Cuomo had mentioned that regional talks around cannabis policy had provided an early framework for that alliance that they formed. And I'm wondering, looking forward and coming out of this, if there's any thought, particularly as we, have two presidential candidates who neither of them are promising certainly an end to federal prohibition. What about the idea of regional cannabis economies, whether that's continuous borders working together, or whether it's states like California and Oregon who are able to produce far more cannabis than they consume, in an alliance with states on the East Coast who are in the opposite circumstance. They're new to legal cannabis or about to legalize. They don't have the weather and institutional knowledge that we're blessed with, and that working together, California could be exporting cannabis to other states.
I think these are really interesting ideas. And let me just first back up and say, I think these alliances that have come together during the COVID-19 pandemic are appropriate. This is a time where government at all levels, local, state, federal, need to be working together. Also, with our other state partners needed to be working together. I really appreciate the governors reaching out and leading on these regional pacts. You can share data, you can share resources, you can share best practices, you can learn from one another, and it can really be beneficial to our people. So, through partnership, you get better leadership and better results and outcomes for the people of this state. I think the same ideas can be translated, outside of a crisis in scenario and environment. I think this idea of cannabis, interstate commerce between states that have legalized cannabis is worthy of consideration. We have a lot of folks who talk about states' rights. Maybe this is a compelling states' rights issue where states who've decided that they want to have legalized cannabis and can work with other states who've decided that. But I do think we're going to need whenever you start getting in that interstate nexus, then you run smack into federal regulation and federal law and federal oversight. So what would be the appropriate way to sort of dip our toe in the water on this issue? I think two neighboring states to start might be a little smaller than a group of contiguous states of 10 or more. Would be different than all the states that in the United States who've legalized cannabis working together. So I think asking for making the right ask, not making it too big at the right time, I think makes sense to just get the idea started, uplift it, promote it, show it can work, show that the sky doesn't fall and the world doesn't stop spinning, and then build it out from there. But the idea of Oregon and California, for example, is I think really interesting. but it's hard to see it happening, outside of a Democratic administration. Maybe with the states' rights sort of hook, but given some of the previous views on cannabis espoused by this administration currently in power, it's been I think the battle, it's more of an uphill battle. But I like the idea. I've been in discussions about it. I think it's smart. I think it's thoughtful. I think there is potential for it.
And do you see any specific organization, part of the government, private industry taking the lead on this idea? Is there anything we can point to now, look at, try to support, or is it somewhat in the ether at this point?
It's, I think it is being developed. So I'd say ask Max Michalonis. He's one of the people I've talked about it the most, and he's working with some folks on this issue, at least just developing the idea. How best to do it? I think a request at the federal level for some dispensation, some flexibility around 2 states doing a pilot would be appropriate. And then you have to turn it from an idea into reality and start making it work. Are California and Oregon the best 2 states? I mean, for a Trump administration, I don't know how much he wants to do for California, although Governor Newsom's been wonderful about creating a working relationship with him that allows our people to benefit and get support from the federal government. So it's not out of bounds or impossible, but maybe 2 purple states or even 2 red states that want to do it, that are contiguous, that want to seek an ability to try it for a time-limited period with a study afterwards, where there's a report back to the legislature, to Congress and the Senate, so they can review it and make some recommendations. If you make something apply everywhere in the United States forever, that's a lot for some people to digest. If you make it smaller and time limited, and in a way that can be reversed if necessary, then that's a little easier. So I would propose the latter and try to pick the right contiguous states and see if that's possible. But making it real is really important, putting it into action instead of the powerful idea it is only.
Excellent. I'm going to hit you with a couple of questions from our online Q&A as we come towards the end of our hour. Christian Robeson asks, can you talk about the AB 1291 bill that was signed last year?
So this is when I need Max more than ever. I don't do good with the numbers. Which bill was that?
I gotta be honest with you, I just read it off the question.
Okay, Max is telling me, but he's using, okay, good, he gave me a link. Thank you, Max. LPA. Labor Peace Agreement. Okay, Max, thank you. Always my advisor, my counselor, I appreciate it. I'm not sure. This is the Reggie Jones Sawyer Labor Peace Agreement bill. I don't know how, I guess I'd want to ask folks in the field how it's impacted them and what it's meant for them. Generally, I'll just kind of take one step back, broad strokes. I'm very supportive of labor peace agreements. Again, I haven't hidden my perspective that the future of the industry is interlinked with working people and labor. That means labor peace and the ability to talk to workers about the potential benefits of a union and then let them vote and let them decide. I think that's right. I think that, empowering workers and having workers succeed as industry succeeds is very important. I do know that that could increase costs, but I think this is about people, not just costs and not just money. It's about, a dignity of a good job and with safe and fair working conditions and healthcare and a living wage, retirement. I know those all add costs in a heavily regulated, high cost industry already, but I think that's the right way to go and the right way for people to be treated. So that's my general perspective on the issue. If there's a more nuanced, granular component of that bill that the presenter of the question is interested in, I'll do my best to answer it. But generally, that's my perspective.
Yeah, I'm going to let Christian Robeson is the one that asked the question, and she's HR for Candescent. So I'm allowing her to talk, and maybe she can give her perspective on this.
Hello, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
I can.
Okay, great. So I'm curious if, just generally speaking, if the BCC and the state will be pursuing this, considering the current climate and conditions right now where cannabis is in California, financially and otherwise, or is this something that they may consider down the road, as you know, once the pandemic, if the pandemic in the near future is managed better? What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that this is something that we're going to see an uptick in pursuit over with businesses right now?
From my perspective, and I can't speak for the Bureau or you know, other entities or people, just me. I think it's not a good idea to put a hold on any real worker protections. I just think that's really hard right now. I think workers are the ones who are really suffering right now. Who, you know, if anything, we're moving in the direction of more protection, certainly for you know, essential workers, frontline workers, you know, healthcare, grocer, first responders, etc. Cannabis industry has been deemed an essential business. So I would say folks would be hard pressed to be rolling it back. Is a delay possible? Maybe. I don't know that I'd get behind that, but you know, if say a labor management coalition agreed to some approach that you know, allowed businesses to stay afloat when they might otherwise shutter their doors, maybe. But I think how that decision gets made is important too. Not that it be imposed from above, but that it be designed and shaped with workers having a voice at the table.
Great, thank you. We have, I think, time for one more question from the Q&A. This is Ben Lubin, writes, Mr. Assembly Member, when you testified to tax and revenue, you may have subtly inferred that lowering taxes may have to go back to the voter. Could you elaborate on this scenario regarding AB 1948? Thank you for your consideration and dedicated service.
Thank you for the kind words, first and foremost, and appreciate the question. I don't know if I suggested that, but I do know that changes to Prop 64, that there's different perspectives and that different legal minds and legal analyses could come out differently. I think generally there's a belief that if you're making changes in furtherance of the proposition, the legislature can do that. And I think it's generally 2/3. I'll let Max confirm that in the chat. But if you're really doing something that's not in furtherance and that's different, that the voters didn't decide on, then you would need to go to the back to the ballot and to the voters. It might be that there was someone making a point about whether it would need to go back to the ballot, and I couldn't say absolutely 100% without a doubt. No way it could be any other way, that the legislature is the only body that can make this determination, and it wouldn't have, and that some other legal authority wouldn't say that it needs to go back to the people. But I think it can be decided by the legislature. That's why I've introduced the bill in the legislature, and I've had it for the 3 years. So I didn't mean to. I don't believe without seeing what I said. My intent was not to suggest that it needed to go back to the voters. I just wanted to be open to the possibility that I might not be 100% right. Although I am firm in my belief that the legislature can do this.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Thanks for all of your time and insights today, sharing them with us. Thank you for all the work you do on behalf of the cannabis community. I want to say thanks to Susan for putting this series of really, really high level, very important discussions that are going to move this community forward, but also for creating a space for us to get together right now and be a community. I've very much appreciated being a part of it. I've very much enjoyed speaking with you. I'm going to give you the last word. Just say thanks, everybody. Again, I'm David Bienenstock. I'm a journalist covering cannabis, and I am the co-host of the podcast, Great Moments in Weed History, if you want to check it out. And I'll give you and Susan the last word, but thank you so much, everybody.
Which is very hilarious podcast if you haven't heard it. It's been getting me through making all these face masks for all my loved ones. So David, you were not hilarious today. But you were hilarious in the past. I heard this on one of your podcasts. You guys, when you were activists, you used to have a sign, and I saw it at High Times once. It said free weed. And that got everyone's attention. Free weed. And as soon as they came over, you said information. But I was thinking about that, and based on this case in Nevada, there's an expo, a trade show for head shops. And one of the vendors got raided and arrested at this trade show for selling cannabis seeds in Nevada. And they fought it, and they won because they proved that cannabis seeds do not have any THC in them. And so I think that the industry should give back right now, show how compassionate we are. Can we start mailing seeds to everybody in California? And if you don't know the answer to that, I'm willing to, be a guinea pig and I have a bunch of seeds. I'll start mailing them to everyone, but that would really help. If people could grow their own right now, and the industry would benefit, because once people grow cannabis, they love it more. And they usually decide, because they call it weed, but it's really hard to grow good weed. And once they do grow it, they're probably, either it's going to be a gateway to gardening in general, or it's going to be a situation where they're like, I really care about my cannabis and who grew it, and that's going to help them gravitate more to the regulated industry. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, Rob.
Sorry, I'm reading all of the awesome chat comments here. Everyone wants to be on your mailing list now. Sorry, can you reframe the question? I was distracted by that. Can you reframe the question for me? And David, by the way, I think you're really funny.
Thank you.
Yay. I was wondering if, since there is case law that cannabis seeds can be sold at a convention that is not entering into the regulated market because there's no THC in the seeds. So I was wondering if I could mail seeds to folks. And I think it's a way to give back, to have the industry give back to people and say, right now, I know you don't have any money, so we're going to help you grow your own cannabis, because we know that once you grow it yourself, you're going to want to come back to us to get safe medicine. Once you grow it, you realize that you're really not going to save all that money. It's hard.
Right. I would be a little uncomfortable providing you legal advice on that. I don't know if it would be treated like a normal delivery with the delivery rules, and if the local jurisdictions where there's bans would be able to prohibit such mailing. Certainly, I think a lot of challenges and risk in doing any interstate mailing. So I'd be careful about that. I know there's some really thoughtful and knowledgeable attorneys who can look at that specific fact pattern, fact scenario, and advise you. But I guess my short answer is I'm not sure, and I wouldn't want to give you the wrong advice.
Okay. I thought you might not know, but you might run into it and come up with an answer later. But anyway, thank you so much, Rob, for all that you do. Thank you for participating in this. Thank you, David, for moderating, for interviewing. This is going to happen first Thursdays of the month for the rest of the year. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in and all your wonderful chat. If you want to, you can save the chat, and I will leave it open for a few minutes. I'm going to close with the commercial about my book. So thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you, Susan. Great job. Thanks for having me. Thank you, David. Appreciate everyone for participating.
Same. Thanks,
All the best.
everyone.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Hi. Hi. We're gonna read a book. What is it called? What's growing in Grandma's Garden? A book to help grown-ups have a conversation with children about cannabis. What's cannabis? You don't know what cannabis is? No? Good thing we have this book right here. My grandmother loves plants. She has lots of them. Oh, this is right here. Most of the plants are for eating or for medicine. Sometimes we pick something in her garden and eat it right away. My favorite is carrots. Sullivan, do you like carrots from Grandma's garden? Yeah. You don't like hardly anything, do you? Do you want some mashed potatoes? Do you want a steak? No. You want a hamburger? No. You want broccoli? No. Grandma has some plants that are extra special to her. She keeps them locked in her greenhouse. She says it's called cannabis. She uses it to make medicine and to relax. She says that I can look, but not touch. The cannabis leaves are so pretty. I want to have some. Grandma says they're just for grown-ups. Some things are just for grown-ups, right? Yeah, like cannabis. She said that my brain is still growing, just like the plants in the garden, and I need to feed it only things that will help it grow. I want my brain to be as strong and fast as a supercomputer. I love Grandma and her garden. When I grow up, I'm going to have a garden too. The end. That's not the end.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Love you.
Bye. Great job.
Hugs. I need a hug. Bye.